about capturing requirements, but the end result is what, a set of user stories. So the user stories is almost the technical piece of work. Um, as a dot dot dot, I want to so that I can. So it's actually a definition, and then you have some acceptance criteria with that. So that seems to be the important final document that you're trying to create that gets handed to the development team.
Yes, that is. And that is the single most important artifacts that you can start your actual building, any single building blocks or elements in your project.
Brandon is a senior business solution architect at EPAM Systems and wrote an amazing article on Salesforce Ben called Mastering Salesforce Requirements.
I think lots of people, when they're looking at requirements, they think of, solution. They think of how do we fit a solution into client's requirement, into what clients wants, but they often sort of oversees the power of this particular solution. Requirement is not really linked to solution. It is more linked to the success of the project. If you look at the success of the project, you need to have the definition of done. You need to make sure that the project is being facilitated the proper way. And the only tangible way that you can do that is that you have exactly the right amount of requirement, the right set of requirement, and you have your team to get into that, to work on that. So that being said, I do see lots of projects and lots of people, when they're doing the requirement, they're just asking client, what do you want? And those are the things that you want. And I'm going to list that out and distribute that to my team, and my team will be just working on those requirements. But those requirements are just what the client wants. It's like you have a kid and the kids say, hey, I want this type of things from the store, but you're not really thinking, why do I need to buy those kind of things? Are they really contributing to certain, factors or aspect in this kid's life? And this happens in lots of projects as well.
I think you said some important words. There's want and need. So yes, I want this, but I want an outcome. What do I need as a solution? So I think there's a big difference there, and I think that capturing and validating the requirements is that's the important part. We just had a research report that we put out called the Change Intelligence Research Series, because we analysed like 50,000 orgs a month, about 1.3 billion metadata items, staggering numbers. 50% of custom objects never get used. 41% of custom fields never get populated. So that clearly speaks to the importance of capturing what you need, not what they want. So what are some approaches that you would use to get into what people really need?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I'm not really surprised by the number that you just mentioned. Actually, to be honest, throughout my career, I have never seen any very clean Salesforce work. It's just because the nature of the platform. It's a great platform, but lots of people, when they're maintaining it, they tend to do the platform as a very ad hoc fashion. And I don't really blame them, because lots of time you talk to the user, hey, I want this type of things. Okay, I'm going to implement this for you. I want this automation. I'm going to write a piece of code for you, or I'm going to create a flow for you. But you do need to plan very carefully before you actually get into doing anything. So that's why gathering the requirement is so important. There are a few different approaches that I usually would take. I highlight that in the article as well. It depends on the nature of the project or the nature of the things that you are going to do, that you should have a different type of approaches that you're going into. The first type of project or the first type of thing is just a brand new org that a company, they don't really have any CRM system and they are getting onto Salesforce, or they are on other CRM system, they want to migrate it onto Salesforce. For a platform like this, the company or the clients, they usually have a vision of end-to-end process. Before you get into that, you need to put that end-to-end process on paper. You need to help them to understand which part of the process cannot be facilitated on Salesforce. They need to have a clear vision of what will be on the Salesforce, what won't be on the Salesforce. And from there, you go through each steps in this end-to-end process and to design this particular process. So in my mind, it's similar to building a house. So you first really need to know which land that you are building this house on. And once you have the house, you need to have a vision. How many floors I'm going to build? What is the use for the first floor? What is the use for the second floor? How big I need my bedroom? Where do I place the different kind of items? All of those things comes into play to help you building a house before you actually building it. And it's the same as the Salesforce project when you're building something from the ground zero. But the other type of project is slightly different, is when a client typically they come to you to say, hey, my sales team is not really working right now. They are using the platform, but I don't really see a big increase in the revenues. And I want to know why this is happening and what is the issue. And this is, I call that a challenge-based project. So a challenge-based project is typically brought up by a certain type of personas. So you first need to understand what this persona is doing on a daily basis. A typical approach that many people are not doing anymore, but they should be doing is shadowing those clients, shadowing the actual workers who are doing job in the system. So you can identify, oh, seems like this person is repetitively doing a certain type of task that I have the opportunity to automate it. Or this user is doing something that is really, really odd that probably is not something that we should be facilitated on Salesforce. And once you help people to realize what they are doing is the cause of the issues, they started to have the ideas of how to sort of enhance it. And from there, you talk to them, and then you list it out what are some of the challenges that the personas are facing instead of what are the things they want to do in the system. Then from there, you figure out what they want is not really what they need, and what they need is what you are going to propose. So those are the typical two approaches I usually take based on the nature of the project from higher level. But if you do need to know, the detail level in terms of how to use the writer story, how to use the user story, how to write acceptance criteria, how to define the definition of done, those are all highlighted in the article as well.
So I hear a lot in the Salesforce ecosystem of whether it's an admin team, business analysts, pushing back on the customers or their end users about, and that's always a challenge because often it's someone fairly senior saying, I need a field or I need a flow, just go and do it. So how you're a consultant, so how do you push back and go or say no politely?
That's a good question. I personally don't like to use the word pushback. I do hear lots of people using that word pushback, but there's another way of doing pushback. How I'm doing that is you're not pushing back, you're emphasizing that you feel the pain of the user, but at the same time, you want to guide user through the process to let them realize that what they want is not right. Typically, when you are telling people, no, we're not going to do this, it is very aggressive behavior and people are not accepting that really well. But as a consultant, as an architect on the project, you want the user to actually realize what they want is not right and that they will have a better idea working with us to come up with a better solution. So I usually will help them, hey, let's take a look at why do you need this, say, a field, or why do you need this flow, and why the user is doing things this way. There is a typical approach that I personally use a lot. It's called 5 whys. So you usually continuously to asking this question based on why. And as you are asking those questions, you will figure out a deeper layer of why the user is trying to do something. And from there, you're guiding the user get into that state to really examine their own thought and their own behavior. And you are working together at that level. And when you are coming up with the solution, is not the solution us as a consultant to tell the user that is the best practice. It is the solution the user comes up with as their best practice and propose that to us. And they accept that usually fairly well.
So is there such a thing as best practice?
I don't believe so. I believe there is a best technical approach in certain situations, right? Just like when you're writing, Apex code, or when you're writing any automation logics within Salesforce. Some people, they prefer to use Flow. Some people, they prefer to use Apex. Some people, they use Trigger framework. I personally don't think there's a right or wrong answer to that. They're all best practice based on what sizes your company is or what your end goal is. So in my opinion, the best practice is the best solution that fits the client. Sometimes your best practice might be creating lots of fields if the client just needs all of those informations. So I really don't like when people say this is not the best practice of Salesforce, so we're going to do it that way. We're going to create a flow instead of writing an Apex class. I don't believe there's a such thing, but whatever the best practice is, whatever the client feels like it, and whatever the client knows that this is actually what they need and it will work for their daily use.
So that's the best practice in terms of both business process, because that's in terms of what works for them. I always used to say best practice is one that you can get everyone in the company to follow. So if you can get more people working in a consistent way, and then you've got best practice in terms of architecture. And it's interesting, the architecture, Salesforce, his own architecture team, they call them patterns. So they're not saying you have to do it this way, but they're looking at some common patterns. So yeah, absolutely. And I think it is challenging, and you need quite a lot of it's interpersonal skills. It's your communication skills rather than your technical skills. Is helping guide your customer or your client or your business user to help them discover the answer rather than you telling them. So I think maybe we need to spend more time developing those softer skills rather than building just the technical skills.
Absolutely. And that is the main difference between a true consultant architect versus your company in-house administrator or developer. They are more of a doer, whereas the architect and consultant, they are actually listen to your needs and to transform what you want, what you need into actionable items, and then we build it up on top of that.
Yeah, I think that's true when you have bigger teams, but I think there are a lot of people who are listening to this podcast are probably there's a team of 2 or 3 of them, so they need to wear those different hats. Yeah, they've got their business analysis architect hat on, so they need to bring those skills out, and then they'll put their admin developer hat, and they'll have to go and build something. So I think for a lot of people that it's a range of skills that they need to bring to bear.
Yeah, definitely. Even as consultant, when you're working on a smaller, clients, you do have to wear multiple hats. Like to me, I am a solution architect, and most of the time I do the solution design. But there are times that I actually need to write user stories. I need to lay out the acceptance criteria, and sometimes I do need to go into system to build a demo to show that to the client before we actually start the building process. And that goes back to the point that you're talking about. I really like it. That is, lots of people, they need to wear multiple hats. And sometimes, how do they actually shifting between those different kind of roles and to actually perform their work? And I do have another article available on Salesforce Band as well, is talking about how do you shift your mindset to help you to build up those kind of skill sets. And there are different tools that you can do, using the scales. And I do have a very personal favorite approach. I call that Moscow approach to help you gathering those requirements as not only admin developer, but also, business administrator or even seasoned solution architect. It's really good approach to sort of dig into the client, to guide them through the process, to put their mindset on the paper, and to allow them really brainstorm to pick up what they need, to pick up what they want to do.
So one of the things you said, I think we talked about capturing requirements, but the end result is a set of user stories. So the user stories is almost the technical piece of work. As a ... I want to so that I can. So it's actually a definition, and then you have some acceptance criteria with that. So that seems to be the important final document that you're trying to create that gets handed to the development team.
Yes, that is. And that is the single most important artifacts that you can start your actual building, any single building blocks or elements in your project. So that requires a skill. How do you translate from the requirement to the user story? The requirement you're gathering, they are what the user wants. and you might gathering different requirements such as the user want this field, user want that field. But that's why you need to dig into why the user want this field and how the user want this field, how they're going to use that field. And those will be translated into a user story. There was one statement you made earlier. I might disagree with you, that is, user story is a technical piece of the statement. In my mind, user story should not include any technical artifacts in it. A user story, it is something that you produce for the user. It should not have any technical terms within the user story. It should just document what the user story want to do and why the user, what the user want to do and why the user want to do in the most plain language that you can possibly have within it. And if you write a user story and you send it to your backend user, your user has questions to you in terms of some terms that you use in the user story, then that is a failed user story, in my opinion. And you should be crafting your user story
that makes sense.
as simple as possible. And I do have a 6-second rule. If you can read a user story in 6 seconds, that's the perfect user story. If it is more than 6 seconds, maybe you need to actually work on that a little bit more.
Okay, that's a great rule. I like that. But the user story could have things attached to it, supporting information. So it could be linked back to the business process document that you've drawn, the process map, linked back to maybe some metadata items that you need to consider. So I'm not suggesting it's in the words of the user story, but you need to make sure there's as much supporting information that you've gathered during the analysis phase,
yes,
attached to that user story before you pass the development team.
Yes, so what you essentially described, that was the acceptance criteria and what you're going to do around the acceptance criteria. Acceptance criteria is usually the actionable items on the user story. A statement of the user story is kind of like a higher level statement. If you are visualizing a house, so your user story is actually a room, for example, a bedroom, right? So you only want to know that the bedroom is for sleep because I need to rest. But you do not really need to know any details in this statement. But all of those details are actually within acceptance criteria. For example, when you walk into a bedroom, that you want to make sure your bed is in the center of the room, that you can just lay down and the bed is a king size bed. All of those details, they are acceptance criteria. And acceptance criteria is the most important piece in your building phase, because this one is linked to the definition of done as well as the solution design or any diagram that you are going to produce. So that's one common mistake that I see lots of people are making, is you're producing a process diagram, and within that process diagram, you're only linking them to user story instead of acceptance criteria. But user story is only a high level outline of what you're going to do. But the progress, the diagram that you're producing, they're actually the single actions that your users are going to take, or the single outcomes your users are expecting, and those are all linked to the acceptance criteria.
Everything you've talked about makes perfect sense. The question is, do I have to use this for every project? You could easily go, well, it's just a simple change. I know how to do that. I could just go and add that really quickly. So should I go through this process of capturing requirements and understanding user stories for every change?
Absolutely. If this is a project with a set time frame, with a team, even just 1 or 2 people in a team with a set time frame, and you have the deliverables that are well defined, you have a deliverables that you need to deliver to the client, you must use this approach. Otherwise, there's no way for you to tangibly evaluate the success of the project as well as the feasibility of your solution. However, there are other type of projects within the industry these days that is, managed services. So lots of people are actually doing managed services project for certain clients. So in that case, you still need to produce some level of document, but you can simplify this process by sort of combining your user story and acceptance criteria into one. Because you are not producing something at a complex level or something in a very structural way. You're doing things in an ad hoc way, but the way you're doing it is just for documenting. So in that case, your user story and acceptance criteria can merge into one single piece, and I would like to that user criteria. So that user criteria, you don't really have to follow any single format. You don't need to do, add someone, I want to do something so that I can do something, because you don't really have a persona that is defined at that phase. You are just doing the ad hoc maintenance work. So your user criteria can actually be a very action-driven type of thing. So, given a user can do some certain type of things, when a user do this and they want this type of things to happen. So you can quickly do that in the system, and you can quickly implement that to the users as a maintenance.
Obviously, everyone's talking about AI around customer data, but let's think about how AI can support the business analyst or the consultant. So, I mean, we're now seeing process maps being drawn automatically by AI. And we can also see that if you do a good process map, you can use AI to automatically draw or write user stories for the acceptance criteria. Have you had any experience of that? Is it good, or is it too early?
I don't think it's early at all. To be honest, I've been using that in the past at least more than a year. As soon as ChatGPT was released, I started using ChatGPT to help me with crafting some user stories. And I do notice ChatGPT is getting better and better at it. Although I wouldn't fully trust AI to generate everything for me, but I usually use AI to help me to sort of do the grammar tech, or to help me to rephrase different kind of user stories to make it slightly shorter, or to make it easier to read for the users for that. In terms of acceptance criteria, I do use AI sometimes to help me generate those, because lots of time when you're writing the acceptance criteria, they are sort of tend to be wordy, because us as human, we like to explain ourselves. Whereas when you're using ChatGPT, it actually eliminates all of those unnecessary pieces, and you get a cleaner version of it. I do like that. However, I do want people to be very careful with using AI tools to do anything related to solution. Salesforce is still a relatively new platform, and we have new releases on quarterly basis. And this type of AI platform, they are learning what's available on the market. And when those new technical tools or those new technical terms available to us, ChatGPT is not able to sort of grasp all of the details inside of it. So it's better to come up with a solution design on your own instead of using ChatGPT to help you with the solution design. Another quick thing that I usually use ChatGPT to do is I actually use that to help me craft emails. Lots of time that when you're having a rather hard conversation with the client to ask them sign up some user stories, or they don't agree with some user stories, and you need those challenging and tough conversations, ChatGPT is pretty good to write a very gentle, nice wording emails to help you facilitate those tough conversations.
Okay, so you picked up a number of points. I mean, our experience is that if you draw a process map and do a good job of a UPN process map, inside Elements GPT, it will automatically generate the user stories with the acceptance criteria for you. And our experience was, we looked at some of those user stories and went, well, they're not as good as they could be. But then we went back and looked at the process map and went, actually, it's not that the AI is not generating a very good, it's because the input wasn't very good. And I think it's forcing us to be better business analysts. We go, okay, we need to tighten up that process map. And if we do that, then it will write some good user stories. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, it's doing a lot of the work for you, but you still need to test it. It's not going to replace the business analysis skills. Your skills in terms of questioning the customer, understanding what they need, all of that will still be required. It's just doing some of getting the first draft out for you fairly quickly, and therefore you can work on that. So I think AI is going to support us, but it's never going to replace us in terms of the work we're doing. And I love that idea of actually crafting emails, which again, that's the first time I've ever heard of it doing that, but actually softening some of the language about, okay, we need to ask the question this way, giving some clues. So I think that these are all tools that we should be using as business analysts. And if we're not using them, if people are listening aren't using those tools, you ought to start using them, because you're not they're just going to make us more effective. They're going to make us more productive.
Yeah, absolutely. It helps to facilitate conversations with the client and to make sure that all of your documentation are right there.
This has been fantastic. Thank you for opening our eyes to the importance of requirements and user stories and documentation. And we'll make sure the links to those different documents from Salesforce Ben are in the description. So thank you, Brandon, for spending time with me.
Thank you for having me on your podcast, Ian.